From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Chicago Newsroom once again, the show where we sit around and talk about the city that we like to sit around and talk about. And today, well, what else is there? Lori Lightfoot scored an amazing victory on Tuesday night, and she deserves heaps of credit. But you know, the numbers are the things that are really alarming. She won with just shy of about 100,000 votes last time I looked, or 17% of those who voted. But there are roughly 1.4 million registered voters in Chicago, so that's about 1.3 million registered voters who didn't vote for her. And if you look at the whole population of Chicago's that's older than 18, that's about 2.3 million. So of all the people in Chicago who theoretically could have voted for Lori Lightfoot, 1 in 23 did. That's not in any way, of course, a knock on Lori Lightfoot. We're not picking on her. It's just that it's a look at how many Chicagoans didn't vote on Tuesday, despite early voting and a much more accessible vote by mail system. So on today's show, I'm hoping somewhere or other we'll get to ask our guests if this whole voting for your leaders thing is kind of a 19th century concept, and whether we're not getting comfortable with the "and I alone can solve these problems" type of leadership. After all, not even 40,000 under 24 Chicagoans elected to cast a ballot on Tuesday. We have, I'm proud to announce, for the first time ever in the history of Chicago Newsroom, possibly the best post-election panel that's ever been assembled anywhere right here at this table today. I refer in alphabetical order to Bruce DuMont, the Dean of Chicago Talk and News and Politics, and an old friend of mine from back in the 70s.
When we were
or something.
kids.
Oh my God, it's been a long time. Glad to have you back again, Bruce. Jacky Grimshaw, a veteran of the Harold Washington administration and a political activist for generations. And there's been a lot of talk lately about Harold Washington and how any of this refers back to those days. Well, we've got the original source with us here right now. A.D. Quig, one of my favorite newer reporters on the scene, and just an incredibly hardworking person from the Daily Line, and you guys have been doing spectacular work, and I thank you very much for everything you've been doing.
Thank you.
And maybe the hardest working guy in journalism in Chicago, Bill Ruthhart, is here from the Chicago Tribune. If there's anything that's happened with the mayoral race, you've been there and written a paragraph or two about it. So I regard you as one of the great authorities, and I'm glad to have you here today.
Well, thanks. Good to be back.
Yeah. So that's it. Those are the introductions. Where do you want to start? I think it might be a really interesting thing to talk about who is going to endorse these people. You got 12 people or however many who didn't make it, and some of them carry some pretty big constituents. What's going to happen? Panel?
I think the key endorsement, at least the first one, is going to be Willie Wilson. He won virtually all the predominantly black wards, got close to, I think, 56,000 votes. And I understand, because of conversations with his team today, he is spending his time going out and meeting with all of the committeemen in all of the black wards where he ran, as well as that he won, as well as Hispanic wards where he ran, but he certainly has contacts there. In addition, he's talking to the Republicans up in the 45th Ward, the far northwest side. He's basically going to all the constituencies that supported them. He's listening to what they have to say, and he is going to follow their lead. He's going to be a representative of their collective recommendations. So he isn't necessarily going to just knee-jerk pick one of the two. He's going to do some homework on it, and there's no exact plan when he'll release that information, but probably in the next 10 days.
Are you hearing that he will endorse one of the two?
Yes, he will be taking that information and making it public.
I think he's also looking at his issues, right?
Yes.
That he pushed for, the red light camera, and he has been deaf on that. And I think
and taxes.
And taxes, right? Increase his support in the black community because those red light cameras were just eating up the proceeds of the black community.
Right.
Anybody else?
I'm going to be interested to see what Amara Enya does. She kind of represented the young activist who got involved in politics after the Laquan McDonald video was released. So I'll be anxious to see what her next move is. Do we expect Chance the Rapper and Kanye West to stay involved in this race?
But those people didn't vote.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's
True.
That's her big problem. I think.
Yeah.
She doesn't have many people she can throw.
Right.
But then there's also Dorothy Brown's folks.
Yes.
You know,
Right.
the older black church ladies.
Yeah, and I'm not sure they turned out for Amara.
No.
Yeah,
No.
no, exactly. But Dorothy Brown can have an impact with that constituency.
I get the impression she will not be endorsing Toni Preckwinkle.
I think that's definitely true.
I do think that while we're all interested in seeing who endorses who, and some of these candidates will just stay out of it, I think sometimes those of us that follow this stuff closely put too much emphasis on that. I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of voters who are trying to figure out who Lori Lightfoot is and how does she compare to Toni Preckwinkle. Toni Preckwinkle's a known commodity to a lot of folks in Chicago. Lori Lightfoot, not so much. So to me, the big question is, does Toni Preckwinkle get out of the gate and define Lori Lightfoot in a negative manner to a lot of folks who are just trying to figure out who she is? So.
Election night she started.
She started
Right.
right in. Yeah.
And to answer a question that you posed in the opening of the show is, there's going to be a smaller turnout. I mean, the people that voted last week for their candidate, who's now an also-ran, it's going to be pretty tough, even if there is an endorsement. It's going to be tough to generate those people that go to the polls because they don't really care. And they don't want to vote for two people that they've already decided, I don't want that person. So I think there may not be great movement with any endorsement.
I'm not sure. There was just so many choices that when I talk to people, well, I'm trying to decide between this candidate and that candidate and that candidate. And it was not that so much that, I was anti-Toni if I was for Lori. It was just, do I go Toni or do I go Lori? And so I think the same thing, probably even with the Joyce Daly issue. Do I go Joyce, do I go Daly? Although there are some other history behind the Joyce Daly voters. So I'm not quite sure if it's going to be quite that stark. But I think the other thing to think about is that a lot of people didn't vote because they couldn't make a choice. And so now that it's down to two, there's a possibility that folks said, well, maybe I'll go give it a try.
But is the question on the table this change into this kind of this different way of electing people? Is it just turning people off? If the new method provides you with 14 candidates, isn't that just almost kind of working against democracy, too much democracy or something?
I don't think so.
No?
For people that complain about too many options, I still don't buy it. I know it's come up in a lot of the analysis, but I personally don't buy it. So it's, to me, the more the merrier. I mean, there literally was somebody out there who basically you agreed with. Now, whether or not you took the time to invest to find out who they are, I mean, that's they didn't do it. But certainly, whether it was the Tribune or the Sun-Times or any one of the new medias, I mean, there certainly was enough information out there. You clearly could have made an intelligent vote if you took the time to do it. And most people, unfortunately, don't. It's not important to them because they don't think who the alderman is or even the mayor is has too much effect over their lives, whereas a president or a U.S. senator is viewed as a little more important.
Plus, there was just the fatigue factor, right? Coming off the midterms, there was a high level of excitement. We saw a lot of turnout from millennials in that race, and then, just by the very nature of things, folks pay more attention oftentimes to national politics than they do local politics.
Right.
You're a few months after that. You're just past the holidays. A lot of people aren't tuning in, and then all of a sudden, when they do, there's 14 people to pick from. So. I think some of it's also the timing of the election and coming right after the midterms and so much oxygen of Donald Trump and what's going on the national level being sucked up that I do think, there was a lot of confusion from folks. Part of it is they're just not doing their homework perhaps as well as they should, and part of it is there's just a lot of other things politically that are taking their attention.
And this is like an unprecedented amount of candidates because we don't have open races like this in Chicago.
Right,
I think this
right.
is the fourth open race like this in the last 100 years. And we saw a bunch of people bemoaning how tough it was to get on the ballot. It's so hard to get 12,500 signatures. Well, it wasn't that hard for these 14 people.
Right.
We're seeing a few people making the argument for ranked choice voting in the future. But I don't know if in another 4 years we'll have another crazy race like we do this time.
If people couldn't figure out the one person they want to vote to out of 14, you really think they're going to figure out who's second, third, and fourth? I mean, I don't know if that's a good idea either.
Although I think in the last couple of weeks, I mean, at least the people that called me, because people were asking for my opinion up until, within the last, 24 hours. I'm sure Jacky ran into it as well. Even some really storied political operatives were asking on Facebook, who do I vote for?
Oh,
They were asking me that on the
absolutely,
day of the
absolutely.
election.
Yeah,
right.
And I'm just saying, I can't believe that you are undecided because I know your politics and I know the politics of the people out there.
Yeah.
Where have you been?
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean by there were so many choices, and some of the candidates weren't that differentiated from another, so it made that kind of ambivalence. Do I go this way or do I go that way?
I'm also interested whether there's enough people out there that vote strategically, that they're figuring out. I mean, a good
Waiting to cast their vote.
right, or a good point that's basically making its way through the internet at the moment, and that is Toni Preckwinkle is the president of the county board. That's a big job.
Mm-hmm.
If you vote for her, who's going to be the next president
Another
of the county
cascade,
board?
yeah.
Most have suggested that it might be John Daly. Now, if you're a progressive, or if you're a woman, or if you're African American, if you vote for Lori Lightfoot, you're going to have a mayor that you can agree with, and you're going to have a county board president
get
you can
them
agree
both.
with. You get them both,
Right.
and you keep a Daly from emerging into a position of power on the county board.
You know, I really came to this just kind of weird conclusion that another culprit in this was those interminable, awful forums as opposed to debates where you have, this it looked like the Politburo or something. Everybody's sitting up on the stage. They get asked the same question. They have 1 minute to respond. Everybody has rehearsed their answers. It's just like Groundhog Day or something. You're
As
just
someone
seeing
who
the same
sat
thing
through
over and
dozens of those,
Yes.
I could not agree more. It was incredibly frustrating to go to the same forum after forum and hear the exact same questions, the exact same yes or no answers. And after a while, some of the candidates just quit going to them because they saw the diminishing returns of it. Other candidates couldn't afford not to be in front of any audience that was out there. And the TV stations, all basically just backed out of it. Too many candidates. We can't narrow this fairly. We're just going to wait for the runoff. And unfortunately, that was the result. There weren't a lot of meaningful debates. And when they did narrow down a group for a debate, there was all kinds of complaints about it. So it was a tough spot. You would think there's got to be a better way to maybe organize this moving forward. We see some states that have debate commissions where they set up a framework or a structure. Maybe Chicago needs to look at something like that with the media organizations, or trying to organize something that makes a little more sense.
I went to about 6 of them. Most of the same people were there, but you know what? Lori Lightfoot and Toni Preckwinkle were at every forum I went to, and Bill Daley was only at one.
Yeah.
Bill Daley was definitely running a rose garden
Inevitability
strategy.
campaign.
Inevitability, and it sunk him.
Yeah, the march to inevitability.
Jerry Joyce at least came to a couple of them.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that WBEZ followed someone who went to all 30 forums.
Yes.
And that person was still undecided the day before election day.
Is that right?
Which tells you
I
how
didn't
effective
see
these
that.
forums are. And I don't know if there's a different way you could do it, or if we're ever going to be faced with this problem again.
I would say, having gone to 6 of them, I was more impressed with each of the candidates having heard them than just hearing about them. Granted, it was sort of, after a while, it was sort of a canned response, but I saw some people that I thought cared about the city, and they certainly cared enough to show up.
Tribune did that great story, I think it was over the weekend, about the friendships that formed on the campaign trail. Did you see that, Bill? I thought that was really interesting about how, like, for example, Amara Enya and McCarthy sort of got along, which you wouldn't have imagined. So
He implied the other night in his concession, however, that there was maybe at least 1 or possibly 2 that he really sort of detested.
really bad people
I think
or
I
something.
know who they are. Not that his endorsement's going to mean much.
Right, that's right. So, I mean, we're staying with the endorsement thing for a minute. Is Daley going to make an endorsement? Does he care anymore? Is he done? Is he just gone home?
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I'm pretty sure he's on a beach by now. I think, again, maybe it's just me. I don't put a ton of stock into the endorsements. I think Willie Wilson could have some effect, certainly because you have 2 African Americans in a runoff. He's an African American candidate who did very well in a lot of the West Side and South Side wards. So I mean, he certainly is someone to watch. I think if you're Lori Lightfoot, you're looking for ways to amplify your agenda as a outsider, as a progressive. I think you may see Paul Vallis, come into the fold with some ideas that also would help her then reach out to some of these kind of white wards on the edge of the
wonkies,
city
yeah,
where a lot of workers and cops and firefighters live. If you're a police officer living in the city, you got a heck of a choice on your hands here too.
Bill Daley
So,
did not do
you know.
himself any favors with city employees by saying, you know what, let's go down to Springfield and think about cutting those pension
cutting those
benefits.
pensions. Yeah.
I agree with Bill that I don't think Daley is likely to make an endorsement. He wants to be friends with both sides. So I wouldn't be surprised if he takes a pass. However, Jerry Joyce, who I think is looking to have a future, he's certainly demonstrated strength in 4 wards in a big way, and his endorsement. His endorsement could mean much, and Lori Lightfoot in many of those wards finished second to him. So I would suspect that given the power of the Joyce get out the vote offer, which was very effective, I think Jerry Joyce will make an endorsement of someone and look for some sort of response or reciprocal action at some future election that he may look at.
Well, particularly since Jerry and Lori both got out there early as challenger to Ron. They didn't
That
wait
really
until...
turned out to be a big deal, didn't it?
Right,
Whether you
it
were
certainly
for-
did.
I mean, the
for
thing to
your
think
opposed.
about though is if you're a candidate and you have a particular message, you don't want endorsements that undercut that message. So Lori Lightfoot is running a very progressive campaign. Toni Preckwinkle is arguing that she's not a true progressive.
Right.
Well, if you have Jerry Joyce come out and endorse you, that gives fuel to that argument by Toni Preckwinkle. So there's outright,
but less so
there's
than Daley.
outright
less so,
endorsements, and then there are behind the scenes endorsements where perhaps foot soldiers and folks
Yeah,
are
that's
put into play without something being overt, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll have to see how that all shakes out. To me, I mean, the 2 big questions are whether one, we're going to have a true labor candidate in Toni Preckwinkle. If all of the labor unions get behind her, if all the trades, get behind her, if some of them stay on the sidelines, and then secondly, what does the business community do? They don't have a candidate in this race anymore.
Yeah.
They have a lot at stake in this city. We've seen them, spend heavily in races in the past for Emanuel and more recently Daley. And so the question there is, can Lori Lightfoot make a play for those folks? She's a U of C law grad and worked for a major corporate law firm in town. Some people kind of forget some of that history, which certainly yesterday at the L-Stop, she kind of dropped the reminder when she was being asked about her executive experience. Well, I've advised a lot of C-suite and corporate CEOs on very difficult matters. So that was sending a message, I thought, to some of those folks who are trying to figure out what to do.
We haven't talked about the Latino vote either.
Yeah. By the way, just to point on this point, does she, Lori, does she basically inherit maybe the support of the business community? Not so much about anything overt that she does, but Toni is so pro-labor and pro-unions rather, that that she will be viewed as the lesser of 2 evils without doing a lot of.
It could be, although you have to do something to get that support, right? And Lori Lightfoot needs money, right? She needs to be able to define her candidacy. Toni Preckwinkle is going to have, she's going to have that money. So if you don't do enough to get those folks to fund your campaign, then I think she's got an issue there to deal with. So, I mean, some business folks are just going to stay out of it because they don't like either one of them. But some of them are going to realize, look, there may be a lesser of 2 evils here for me, and maybe I should think about backing Lightfoot. Preckwinkle. She can make the argument to business that she's managed big budgets at the county. She's made tough decisions. She has cut payroll at the county. I think you're going to hear her talk more about that. But the soda tax and being for rent control and some of those other things definitely makes a lot of folks in the business community nervous. So.
I refer our panel and our audience to this Tribune map, which we'll put up on the screen. It's really interesting in so many ways. Of course, we've been talking about it in various ways. But if you look at the North Lakefront, that's Lori Lightfoot territory right there. So we have a situation where, and Bruce, you already made reference to the fact that in some of these areas out here where Daley won, or in areas far out where on the northwest side where Joyce won. The second choice in many cases, if you go down precinct by precinct, in many cases it was Lori Lightfoot who was second. So there were people who were voting for Jerry Joyce, and then their neighbors were voting for Lori Lightfoot. So it begs the question: are we sort of, are we in this interesting position where white people are nominating black candidates? And how does that make a leader of the Harold Washington Coalition feel? Is that a good thing?
Well, remember now, we got white folks too.
Oh, I know. Of course I know that.
So, but yeah, no, the whole issue, remember with Barack Obama, is whether or not we're beyond race.
Yeah.
And I think that question is still there. Are we beyond race? Now, I think one of the things that's happened because of Harold Washington, Barack Obama, and Toni Preckwinkle countywide is that, you're not going to have the government fall apart because, things are going to be disaster because an African American is the political leader. So I think the fear is not as great as when we were doing the Harold Washington campaign.
Yeah.
And we even saw that from 83 to 87, that a lot of the wards that were anti-Harold, we just got a lesser vote in 87. They couldn't bring themselves to vote for Harold, but they just stayed home, which was a vote for Harold. So I think the fear is gone, and that's why I think that white folks could push the lever for Lori or for Toni.
So does this make you feel good? Does this make you feel optimistic? Seeing
Oh
this
yeah,
span
I think
of years?
I mean, going back to what Martin Luther King said, let's judge people by the content of the character and not the color of their skin. And so maybe we are gradually, being pulled in that direction. That was the vision of Martin Luther King back in 1968.
Jacky, I'm curious what you think about a new black-brown coalition. Who's the candidate that can actually build it this time?
Well, no, we haven't quite gotten there, and it was very interesting. And mainly because there have been the efforts to keep the black and brown community at odds with each other, and so none of the candidates that were out there this time, Mendoza or Chico, tried to bridge that coalition. About the only Hispanic leader right now that's trying to do that is Chuy Garcia. And to the extent that Chuy becomes the leader of the Hispanic community, which is fractured as well, we may not see that black and brown coalition come together.
It's a tough coalition to put together. It really is.
Chuy Garcia really didn't do that well this time around.
He did not.
His endorsed candidates didn't do all that well.
Right, that I was surprised that the 14th ward, that Jaime came in last.
Yeah. We have a federal regulation that we're not allowed to mention Ed Burke until 23 minutes into the program, so it's now clear we can do that.
Oh, did I bring it up?
No, I just brought it up. I mean, I throw out to the distinguished panel, Ed Burke, go.
Low voter turnout. This is what happens.
And great ward services.
Right.
That's right.
And organization, foot soldiers.
He's got it all. And who ran in the mayor's race? Who won that ward? I don't know the answer to that question. But
That's luck.
Yeah,
it
looks like
take a look.
it might have been Daley.
It does.
Yeah.
It looks like
I'm
it's
trying
a
to
daily.
figure out 14th ward is about there, right?
Here's 23, here's 13. I think it was Mendoza.
Oh, really?
Mendoza.
Yeah, it's Mendoza.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me too much. But also we should mention, of those 4 wards that Jerry Joyce won, one of those was the 13th ward, the speaker. So that's a signal of who the speaker didn't want.
Yeah. I was thinking about how, if you look at the northwest side, the far northwest side, now that Gardner is in, you have Sposato and Napolitano stays in there. You have a kind of an emerging sort of politically conservative bloc up there that could become more powerful than it's been. Or am I crazy?
We had a panel event a couple weeks ago, and someone on the FOP came up to me and was like, you watch out for the northwest side, because I think the northwest side GOP is a growing bloc. I mean, three people on the city council does not a movement make, but it does kind
the
of
Progressive
signal.
Council was only 3 people once.
True. We're now
It was
we're now
conservative
12.
at one point, 25 years ago. It was.
I think the bigger question on the policing front generally, now they'll have their 3 aldermen in the city council, but neither one of these candidates are a friend of the FOP by any stretch. They have to negotiate a new police contract. We saw what happened when officers Emanuel's acknowledged this with very low morale in 2016 and some of the spikes in violent crime we've seen. It's going to be a very delicate issue for whoever becomes mayor out of Lightfoot and Preckwinkle to form some sort of functioning relationship with the department to deal with this crime issue we have. And it's going to be fascinating to see how that develops and whether trying to get those votes on the edges of the city, whether they temper some of their messaging on policing.
It'll be interesting
to
the dynamic between, if Toni Preckwinkle wins, she's kind of responsible for Kwame becoming Kwame. So I'll be interested to see how they interact as the consent decree plays out.
Yeah. Also, I think the generational. We haven't talked much about the generational, or even some of the conservative aspects. You were talking about conservative positions on the Northwest side where the police and fire live, but also I think we look at the Willie Wilson vote. Again, he finished in fourth place, but again, his constituency was a more conservative even within the African American community. So there are religious issues that he brings to the table that Dorothy Brown addressed it when she was again the spokesperson for the church ladies, as the media used to describe it. So where that vote goes, and you also have a 56-year-old African American running against a 70-year-old. Now there's a generation shift is the moment, and as Toni was making the point on election night, she was progressive before it was hip and successful to be, and that goes back to the early days. She wasn't even, but Toni wasn't even on the Harold Washington bandwagon. She came much later than that. But again, she's been around for 30 years, primarily known as a progressive, when there weren't many progressives around.
I've had this this sense for some time now that Chicago has a lot of conservative people. You just don't hear from them, and that they've kind of given up on politics because they just know that there's no chance. And of course, I was completely wrong on this, as I usually am. I thought Gary McCarthy had a chance of becoming a kind of an attractant for conservative voters, but that didn't happen. But I still think that they're out there. I think that, as you say, there's different parts of the spectrum. You have African American religious people. You have Hispanic religious people. You have white sort of law and order types, and they're not served by this election.
Well, it just says Chicago is a polyglot, that we have everything, and the fact that we have conservatives, you just look at the results of both the Trump and Rauner elections, the votes that came out of the city. Even along the lakefront, I was surprised, going back to those elections, how many votes that Trump and Rauner got out of that lakefront constituency, which is supposed to be, a progressive or at least a more liberal electorate. So, I think the fact that we have this mixture is good for the city. I'm not sure if I'm with 80 that the three wards are going to start dictating what happens in the city council. But it doesn't bother me, that we have
that
those
voice
conservative
exists.
people.
Well, you've also got, if you look at the Daley vote, the Joyce vote, and then you look at the Willie Wilson vote, that's a lot of potentially conservative. You throw Gary McCarthy and even Paul Vallis in there. That's a goodly number to at least
But
say
in
that
the African American community is not a one issue constituency. So
Did he make the right call by making that property taxes? He was a Willie one note on taxes, more so than anybody else running.
Absolutely. That's why Fritz Kagi got the support of the black community, because property taxes are killing homeowners that are really struggling because of everything else that is happening in the economy. That increasing property taxes and unfair property taxes, part of the reason why we're getting the displacement of blacks leaving the city. It's not because of gentrification, but it's because of all of these other issues.
And it's why you're going to hear Lori Lightfoot continue to talk about how she came from a low-income household and continue to tie Toni Preckwinkle to Joe Barrios and the, quote, rigged property tax system. That's not going away at all.
I think we were wondering at the time, and I think we have our answer now, about the impact that Tribune story would have on the story on the unfair assessments and how the burden was placed on the lowest income people, and I think that was a message that got heard, I think, and when Willie Wilson starts picking up the hammer and going after it, that
I also
resonates.
think that the issue that Toni Preckwinkle can certainly speak about, because she's been out there in criminal justice reform for a long time. But the personal way in which Lori Lightfoot talks about it, about her brother being an offender that spent 17 years in prison, and the role of those ex-offenders and the re-entry issues, I think that's another issue that I think it can cause some African Americans that haven't been listening to her. I think she could get their attention with some of that.
No, I think you're right.
So we want to talk about wards. I mean, it's a little early to figure out a lot of it, but let's just kind of talk about the ones that we do know about and what we think were what were the biggest surprises.
The margins of Joe Moore and Proco Joe Moreno losing.
Oh yeah, I'll buy
yes.
that.
Those were surprisingly large. I wasn't convinced that either of them would pull it out, but I really didn't think it would be by the margins that they were.
Joe Moore in 49, he's the head of the housing committee. He's a powerful guy. He's been around for a long time.
Yeah, he was first elected in '91, I think,
Yeah.
and he started out as an anti-Daley progressive fighter kind of guy, and over the last 8 years of the Emanuel administration has tied himself closer and closer to Rahm. And he had one formidable candidate where early on a lot of the challengers in 49 kind of came and supported her and said, we got to get this guy out of here.
Is that what happened? Is that
Yeah.
how it ended up with just
I
the
think
one?
it started out with 3 or 4 challengers to Moore, and they all kind of went instead and backed Marie Haddon, who ended up winning. And she had a good organization, a good coalition
So it was
of
a
progressive
conspiracy.
groups.
And David Orr, who once held that position years ago and was one of the leading figures in progressive politics, he threw Joe Moore under the bus
Yeah.
this time.
Yeah, he did.
And Joe Moreno just had a cascade of scandals in the last few weeks of the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it just really like right up to
the stolen
almost to
car,
election day.
the stolen car stuff that WGN first reported on, the BEZ story about Moreno at a post-Pride event encouraging staffers to take their tops off. Laspada had a scandal of his own where a picture was shared from his bachelor party where he was wearing a banana costume surrounded by African-American children and other guys in his bachelor party wearing monkey masks, which he had a solid apology on that, saying, this looks terrible, and I apologize for that, and I'm going to work on myself, but still pulled it out.
He's got a new nickname, though. His nickname is Bananas.
Yeah. Not a great set of choices for the people of the first ward, I suppose.
Well,
really.
and we saw the head of the Black Caucus and the head of the Latino Caucus on City Council saying, I don't want to work with that guy
Yeah.
if he gets elected. So that'll be an interesting dynamic when he gets there.
Better than some of the previous choices in the first ward.
I think what you can take away from it.
When the first war
more-
was the first
when
war.
it was really the first ward.
I think what you can take away from more largely, and Patrick O'Connor getting a pretty small share of his vote too, is this kind of mood for change, right? Especially along the lakefront,
Yeah.
and that is supported in the numbers that Lightfoot got. So the question is how much of that continues to spread, not just in the aldermanic races, but in the mayor's race, that people are just tired of the same recycled candidates from the establishment, which Preckwinkle can talk about how progressive she's been. She still represents the establishment. She's still a name who's been around for a long time. Or do people want something new? It's really easy to pick a new alderman if your alderman's not paving your alley or getting things done. It's very easy to just go to someone else. On the mayoral front, folks have had the same type of sets of choices from the establishment for a long time, and so I think we're seeing something there. The question, though, is does any of this turn into any true enthusiasm? I haven't seen anything close to enthusiasm we even saw for Chuy Garcia 4 years ago, right?
But did that emerge post-runoff?
There was some of it there before, but I don't know that we'll have to see if we see it, I guess, is my point. I think that the runoff certainly gives people a more stark choice, but can Preckwinkle get enthusiasm outside of the ranks of the SEIU and the teachers union? Are people really excited to vote for her? Because if she can't grow that kind of excitement, get people out, then it's turf that Lori Lightfoot is easily positioned to grab.
And remember, Lori's theme was change.
Right.
All right, so change is part of what you're saying, that people are tired of the recycle, the folks you see all the time. Let's get some new faces and some new ideas. And and bringing up Burke again, I think that, you know, the whole corruption thing was a player as well. You know, Burke, you know, somebody wearing a wire. I mean, you know, that's kind of, if we're gotten that bad that people have to wear wires to see who is corrupt and not corrupt. I think, you know, all that plays into, you know, what's happening in people's choices.
One other thing is, you know, Chicago is known for dirty politics. They have dirty politics all over the country, but we're kind of known for it. And I just think that one of the things
We
that
invented it, didn't we?
I don't know if we invented it, but
We certainly have mastered it.
I mean, I thought we had it patented. Yeah.
thus far, there hasn't been a lot of ugliness
No.
in this campaign.
No, there hasn't.
I think there's a possibility that it may come in the, you know, in the race before us, and I think it's about Lori Lightfoot's, you know, personal life. And there are some people that will not. I think they will use that in some ways in certain sectors of the city.
Quietly.
Very quietly. It certainly isn't going to come from Toni Preckwinkle. It may not even come from Toni Preckwinkle's supporters. But again, that is an issue that certainly hits people in a nerve, and I think that nerve will probably be, punched periodically.
Well, you know,
in a
I look at it the same way
subterranean
that we're talking about white folks voting for black folks, is that I think a large part of the population has gotten beyond the anti-gay, fear or negative reaction. That you're right that might happen, but I'm not sure if that's going to be a big determinant in terms of who is finally elected mayor of the city of Chicago.
That's
But
where
it'll be
Wilson's
stirred, though.
endorsement does play, though. If
Yes.
Willie
Yeah.
Wilson
Yeah.
endorses Lori Lightfoot, that sends a major message on
that would be big,
that
wouldn't it?
base in the African American church community, right?
And that's part of this survey that he's taking with church leaders and the ward committee, because it was church leaders as well. And again, that's going to be a key issue, because the church leaders, or the church ladies, as was referenced before, this is a constituency that is not likely to move in Lori's direction unless there is some leadership, and it may come from Dr. Wilson.
To me, it seems really hard for Wilson to endorse Preckwinkle after he sat on stage forum after forum and called her and the other establishment folks corrupt and said they need to be investigated.
Right, right.
For him to turn around and endorse Preckwinkle, the question would have to be, okay, what was the deal,
Yeah,
right?
and taxes was his big issue, so he's not going to go with her, I wouldn't think.
If he does, it'll be, it'll be interesting on how it's spun, that's for sure.
I was commenting on election night that it looked to me like the kind of the Toni Preckwinkle blue coast here, the largely African American wards, they seem to be pretty rock solid. They're mostly reelected, but that's not turning out completely true, is it? Rod Sawyer in the 6th is going to be facing a runoff.
Potentially.
Potentially.
He's right on that margin.
Right on the margin there. But I think, can we draw a broad conclusion here and say that African American Chicago, at least those who bother to vote, seem like they're pretty happy with their representatives, and they're not really anxious to go out and make big changes? Is that fair?
I think all these aldermanic elections are on such ward-specific issues. In Hairston's case, it's the Obama Presidential Center. In Sawyer's case, I've heard from some folks that he seemed too focused on citywide issues. I don't know if we could draw a broader conclusion about unrest.
So it's kind of it's issue by issue and ward by ward.
Yeah.
Also, it'll be interesting to see who is going to be perceived as the leader of the Hispanic caucus in the city council.
Yeah,
Or
that's true.
in politics. As you say, it wasn't a good night for Chuy Garcia, plus he's in
away.
Washington.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be Luis Gutierrez's daughter if she wins in her runoff, but is it George Cardenas is in a runoff, at least allegedly at the moment.
Right.
Does he emerge as the
Billy
leader?
Santiago's in a runoff.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Raymond Lopez is in a runoff.
The old guard.
Right.
The old guard they're hanging on for their life right now. but
Exactly.
there's
And
no-
25 is totally
Or
new.
they've been
22 is
disgraced.
totally new.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, okay then. You know what? There's a couple of people I want to talk about. Let's gossip for a minute about our mayor. What happens to Rahm Emanuel? What?
He's going to be fine.
Oh, I have no. I wasn't worried about his showing up in a homeless shelter.
He's clearly working on at least a part-time career as a TV pundit.
Yeah, he
We've
seems
seen
to
him
be.
on national
Right.
television more and more.
Did anybody see the Bill Maher thing, where he was the Bill Maher show has a one-on-one interview at the beginning, and I don't think I've ever seen Bill Maher fawn over anyone as much as he did over
didn't see
Rahm
that. I didn't see
Emanuel.
that.
I
I
mean,
guess I
he
thought I
was.
hit some on demand. I
He
didn't see
was
that
like
one.
almost like handing him bouquets of roses. It was just.
Does
you
Ari
are
represent Bill Maher? We should look into that.
I
don't know.
don't
That's
know.
the first question I always
That's a good
ask is
question.
when
That's
Ron's
a
on a
great
national
question.
show is who's the host representation?
Well, he also, remember, he said that Jesse Smollett needed an agent, so maybe he was
Oh, boy.
trying to get him some business.
Yeah. So I mean, is politics still in the future, or does he
Look,
just go off and make money and we don't see him anymore? What
As
happens?
somebody who's covered this guy for a number of
you
years
would know
now,
more than anybody.
Rahm Emanuel's always going to try to keep himself relevant. He always has his entire career. He's
Yeah.
always been, whether by his position in politics or his, he's still viewed within the Democratic Party as a very sharp strategist. He constantly gets phone calls from folks all over the country on, strategy. I think so. What's he going to do? He's going to deploy some of that strategy over the airwaves. I think there's plenty of opportunity for him to weigh in on Trump and the politics of the moment. We're going to have this crazy wide open primary for the nomination for the Democrats for president. I mean, he's going to be a voice that is going to be in high demand, I'm sure. So I think you'll see him, pick his spots to do that on television, and I think he'll probably go try to make a bunch of money, which is exactly what he did the last time he went in the private sector.
when he took a break
He took a break and he made a bunch of money. I suspect that we'll see that while he also, keeps himself relevant on television.
and maybe Bill Daley can help him out again.
But don't hold your breath for that. I will also invite him to come back to be on the Beltway if you'd like to come back.
Oh, okay.
But,
all
but
right,
no salary.
But no salary. Yeah, that's right. So he's not going to surprise us all and jump in for president and
No.
think that he could run against Trump or anything, because that would
don't
be a
think
kind
so.
of a
Doesn't
fun.
seem like the moment for a centrist Democrat, does it?
But wouldn't it be? Could you just imagine
He
the
could
two
be
of
some-
them banging it out on the campaign?
No, but
trail?
he might jump on to run some presidential campaign.
Yeah.
I could see that either
Absolutely.
as a fundraising capacity or
And there's lots of them.
For-
Yeah, there's a lot to choose
help wanted
from.
signs.
What's
Yeah.
interesting is the message that he has been putting out there is that our nominee, and he says on behalf of the Democrats, our nominee needs to come from outside of Washington. And so we got a lot of U.S. senators, running for the Democratic nomination.
yeah.
So I don't know exactly who he has in mind. He's obviously hasn't said nice things about Mr. O'Rourke and that losers shouldn't be promoted, that kind of thing. But he clearly, he points to the success of Clinton and Carter being from outside of Washington. And so, I don't know. We'll have to see where he lands. I do think also if
I
there's a
saved
Democrat
Chicago.
president, if there's a Democrat president, I think there's a handful of top cabinet positions that Emanuel would probably, be open to as well.
Have to rent his house again, though.
Well, there's always a crawl space to keep the wedding dress to allow you to claim
As long as the
residency.
wedding dress is we're fine. Let's gossip about Karen Lewis and the CTU. They endorsed Preckwinkle, but I didn't get the impression that they were really all in on it.
Well, what CTU has said is we feel confident that Tony's going to make it in the runoff, and we're kind of keeping our powder dry until
I see.
then.
Okay.
If
Is
you
that-
At least
look-
on spending.
If you look at 4 years ago, all the big teachers union money came in for Chewy after the runoff.
Okay.
And in fact, CTU spent about $50,000 for Chewy last time before the runoff. That's exactly what they did
I
this
see.
time.
Okay.
And then
But
500,000
most of the
or
money
so.
was AFT. It was Randy Weingarten and AFT money. And so I expect that to come through for Toni Preckwinkle. But there is a question. I thought that the CTU's membership was very enthusiastic for Chewy 4 years ago. I wonder, and it was because Rahm was the foil who had set them to go on strike, who
That's
had
right.
all the controversy, right? They don't have that kind of motivation in this race, and I just wonder, some of the rank and file teachers, some of them live in these predominantly white wards along the edges of the city, whether they feel the same enthusiasm for Toni Preckwinkle that they did for Chuy Garcia 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting how you can draw your power from a negative source like that. And when you're running against Rahm Emanuel, you can really rally the troops.
No, I think that's important, and I think it's going to be tough for either of these candidates, I think, to get the level of the fever pitch that we've seen before. It certainly isn't going to be Harold Washington. I don't even think it's going to be Chuy Garcia.
We should add that to the list of reasons why the turnout was so low. It hadn't even occurred to me until just now. The fact that Rahm Emanuel wasn't in the race.
Or Donald Trump.
Or
Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah.
And
People
that's
are motivated by voting against something,
Right,
oftentimes
exactly.
more than they're motivated for voting
Yeah,
for something.
yeah.
And I think that's very true. And I think, Lightfoot was one of the few candidates who got in the race before Emanuel, who managed to recalibrate in a way that her campaign was about more than just being against what's been going on the last 8
Well,
years.
she benefited so much from what happened with Burke. She can come in and say, I'm the anti-corruption candidate and capitalize on
Well,
that.
that was her one
that was a
commercial.
key point.
That was really the point of her one commercial.
I was shocked it took 2 months for any candidate to. She finally did put that out there, but
Right,
I mean, the fact that none of them went up with a Burke type, even a social media ad in the immediate aftermath, to me was puzzling.
Well, this
Also,
is,
to the sugar tax.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that the sugar tax wasn't, banged over the head. And they've been trying
Chico
to
was
do
the
it
only
now.
one that hit that note in a real
Yeah.
way. So.
Yeah.
And he ended up with one ward.
I know, it
10th
was not
ward.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
He
he had,
owns the southeast side, apparently.
yeah,
That's where he came from.
I raised Karen Lewis just for the reason that obviously she's not in the public eye anymore, or very little, but she did manage to get a statement out in favor of Preckwinkle, and I'm just wondering if there's any enhanced role that she might be able to play if she's really hot for Toni Preckwinkle.
We just haven't seen her publicly much.
Right.
I'm not sure, what
What
her
her
health
health
situation
condition
is.
is. Right.
And I think that, the baton has been handed over to Jesse Sharkey
Right,
and company
right,
at the
right.
CTU, and I would never say never, but I wouldn't expect Karen Lewis to just emerge as this huge force.
I was
in the
just
next
surprised
couple
that she
weeks.
put out a statement. I mean, that surprised me a little bit. I don't know. Community, the Obama thing. Oh, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the 5th Ward, right?
yeah, Leslie
Fifth
Hirsch.
Ward
Hairston.
and 20th Ward.
And the 20, right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, 88% of the people who bothered to vote and bothered to get to the bottom of the ballot so they could answer the question, 88% said that they favor community benefits agreements for the Obama library. That's a rebuke not only to our mayor, but also to our former president, I think, isn't it?
I think if you ask anybody who lives in a community, if you're in favor of a guaranteed return for something, they're going to say yes. So I
Yeah,
guess
yeah, I
I
guess
don't know
there's
it's
that.
so much about Obama is if
Yeah.
you're telling people who live in a, predominantly low-income ward that we're going to make sure you don't get kicked out by all the development comes in. Well, who wouldn't be for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure it's a repudiation of Barack Obama or even Rahm Emanuel so much as of course these folks want protections if that's put on the table. Toni Preckwinkle has said that she would be for a community benefits agreement of some sort. She's said, I'm not sure why Barack and Michelle aren't for this, and I think
Yeah.
Lightfoot also has said, she'd be in favor of something. The question is, what is it? What are the guarantees? There's a lot that can be done just with property tax freezes and things of that nature without, giving away the store, so to speak, or something that's actually costly. But, I think it's an issue, but I don't know that it rises to the level of this is like people soured on
Did it
Obama.
play a role in Hairston not getting, not winning outright?
I think it definitely played a big role in the 20th Ward, where Jeanette Taylor, who was an original community benefits agreement organizer, is now in a runoff with
Nicole Johnson.
Nicole
Yeah,
Johnson.
Maya Hadari, who was endorsed by both the papers and was with the CHA and is probably a little more pro-development, didn't do so well and didn't
Yeah.
make the runoff. So I think you could draw that. But there's a lot of issues in a lot of these where South Shore, Leslie Hairston for years has been struggling to get a grocery store, and
Fill
the
the old
deal was
Domino's,
finally done
yeah.
right before the runoff, right? And we've seen a lot of crime in South Shore. We had the shooting of the barber that made a lot of headlines. And so it's hard to just put your finger on one issue in any
And
single
as a
ward.
fifth warder. And as a fifth warder. I just want to say.
As a fifth
Yeah,
ward.
as a fifth warder. Yeah, the whole community benefits agreement is there, and I suspect the real supporter for that in the fifth ward was Gabriel Piemonte. That was one of his big issues, and he came in third.
Right.
Willie Calloway was more on the Laquan McDonald, and that's how
okay.
you know, and the police issue. And you're right, the South Shore, and you know the Fifth Ward has different issues. Like you could say maybe Obama Library in the Fifth Ward, and but then you know the library. I mean, not the library, the grocery store in South Shore, and then crime, you know, far out in Avalon and South Shore. So there.
Right.
There's a lot of different
communities with
constituencies there.
different
There's
issues, yeah.
people living in the high rises along the lake, and it's a big
Right.
ward with a lot of issues.
I also think there's a goodly number of African Americans in Chicago and around the country that don't think their daily lives were changed much with 8 years of Barack Obama as president. So to come back to a celebratory library and to come up with special deals that are going to affect the indigenous people of the community, it doesn't necessarily play well, and I think that's what we're seeing right now.
And I would say that the parks is as big an issue, if not a bigger issue, than the community benefits agreement as relates to the Obama Library. They're really the folks who.
The road closures and stuff.
Yeah, just don't put, you know, private entities in public parks. And the lawsuit that's going on now. So, you know, there are a lot of issues that are going on in the Fifth Ward.
Well, I fit into that category myself because I was really deeply offended by the idea of taking a chunk of that park. And I felt very strongly about it, as I always have. I thought, you know, putting Diet High School into a park, all these things, the Richard J. Daley saw the parks as just being kind of like land banks that he could build things in. And I really have always opposed it. And I went to that first meeting thinking that there'd be lots of us all yelling about it, and then several people stood up and said, quite blatantly, and there's a bunch of white folks here who are concerned about their parks, but they don't use these parks, so just shut up. This is our park, and we're putting it in there. And I thought, okay, I'll go home.
I mean, part of me, how many acres is Jackson Park?
Good question. It's
500
570 acres.
And we're
I think,
talking
something
about
like that,
15, 20 acres?
yeah. Well, that's always the argument.
I-
No,
you
it's
know.
only a few acres. It's only a
I
few
don't know.
hundred trees.
I mean, I don't know. I guess you always got to decide where the line is. Is the line a movie moguls museum? That's not really worth it. Is the line a presidential library, or is
That
it
wasn't a
just
park, though.
Not at all, right?
The movie mogul wasn't a park.
Well, it's still parkland. It was protected land that should be.
Okay.
It was a damn parking lot.
Is
Yeah.
there
It's just a parking lot. Yeah.
does anyone else have an opinion on sort of the cosmetic look of what we're dealing with for mayor? In other words, you have a very tall candidate
Yeah.
and a very
Mutt and Jeff, huh?
short
Yeah.
candidate.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things that sort of hurt maybe Susana Mendoza, who next to Toni and next to Lori just didn't look as serious. We knew that she liked to play soccer, but that
I
was
don't buy into that as much as I do buy into personality. People in Chicago like
Definitely.
somebody who's going to mix it up, and Lori Lightfoot certainly shows a willingness to do that.
Yes.
Toni Preckwinkle has been very kind of scripted, read from a lot of prepared remarks,
yeah.
very cautious in the first round.
Right.
She's got a, I think, people want to, there's still always the barstool factor. People want to vote for somebody they think they can go have a beer with. And
Yeah,
I think Preckwinkle, by just the very cautious approach she had in the first round, may have to recalibrate that some, because that is part of the personality of politics. I'm not put so much stock in like who's tall and who whatever,
We'll
but I
make for
do
interesting
think
debates.
Yeah, but if
that
they're
stuff.
standing next to each other,
the
I think
style
it's,
of when we see their first one-on-one debate, and you have an attorney who's used to
Thinking on her feet.
right, and moving quickly, and she's very comfortable going on the attack.
Yes.
And Preckwinkle clearly isn't that comfortable. While she's had big positions, she's never been in the limelight like she's about to be in
Right.
primetime television debates, and so it will be
You know,
fascinating to watch
I
how that
remember
plays out.
going to her coming out party when she announced for mayor in South Shore, and I mean there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people there, And it's just kind of like, it was a hot afternoon. It was just like there was this incredible political energy. And then she kind of walks out to the podium and just kind of delivers this really kind of uninspiring little speech, and you could feel the energy deflating.
I'm doing this because I can was the
Kind of,
famous
yeah.
quote.
And then afterward, of course, all the reporters were wanting to talk to her because it was at that time was when she had just fired whoever it was, or
Keller.
staff.
John Keller.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, so the gaggle of reporters is standing around her saying, you know, Madam President, and she pulls out this little piece of paper and just stands there looking down and reads it. And it's like, that's not a good look.
That's not just campaign trail. That's every day. Every time I go to a Cook County board meeting, she has a press conference afterward, and I'll try to ask her a question, and then she'll flip to a page with her prepared remarks, and then you'll try to ask a follow-up, and she'll say, "I'll refer you to my previous statement."
And you don't get that with Lori Lightfoot.
No.
You know?
Lori Lightfoot is the person who, after the Police Accountability Task Force report came out, took questions from reporters for a full hour. She was there until everyone was exhausted.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, Bruce.
No.
I just, that kind of leads to, you know, sort of like a kind of a final question, which is, to the extent that I know we have journalists at the table, so maybe you don't want to engage in this, but let's try to evaluate their campaigns a little bit. I mean, I would postulate that Toni Preckwinkle has not run a very good campaign. It hasn't felt like it was a well-run campaign to me. You guys may not want to comment on that, but on the other, and again, I don't really have a sense that Lori Lightfoot ran a brilliant campaign either. I think a lot of it was that she has a good personality. She worked well with the cameras, and a lot of circumstantial things happened in her favor.
I will say that regardless of the opinions of who campaigned well, it's magnified 100 times now that you're going to run off with two candidates, two campaigns. Every misstep, every mistake, every staffer who goes on social media and does something stupid takes on way more meaning than it did just a week ago. And so, you know, all the campaigns, you know, when they hit the runoff, this was true 4 years ago, have to tighten things up. We saw, I think, I wouldn't be surprised to see staffing changes or more staff added to these operations for both campaigns.
They're going to have to both step up.
And that's where resources come in too. I know people don't like to hear about money in politics and they don't want to vote that way, but that affects the message and what they hear and see. And I think, you know, the ability to raise funds in a very quick fashion in the next couple of weeks is going to play a huge factor.
Toni started, she was the front runner from the get-go, you know, when the whole campaign started. She was the front runner and was doing very well, leading in all the polls until the Burke indictments came down. And then she dropped, and she never recovered from that position. She never really had a good answer, I think, to that issue. And again, I think one of the biggest things she's got to address is, why did she hire Ed Burke's son for $100,000? A lot of people in Chicago want to know the answer to that question. She hasn't really answered it well thus far. And you're right. Lori was just out there sort of like the Timex. She wasn't taking any beatings. She was just slowly, surely, you know, building up to a point where she was able to overtake her. But I agree with you. Toni has not been in a tough race in her life. This is going to be a challenge. But again, I think the big issue is it'll always come down to turnout, obviously. But I think the ability of Willie Wilson to deliver some votes to somebody is going to be the key to the race. And that could go in any direction, but I think you have issues of religious beliefs and a lot of other stuff that are going to go into that.
And you just got the last word. Sorry, that's the way it goes. The clock is the boss. What a great panel, and thank you all so much, Bruce DuMont, A.D. Quig, Bill Ruthhart, and Jacky Grimshaw. I get excited when all four of you being here today. It's a real thrill for me, and I'm very happy to say that. Don't forget, you can see all of our programs by going to this address, chicagonewsroom.org, and you can see the whole archive. Go back and look at some of our mayoral conversations and see what you think. Maybe, anyway. See you next week, all right? We're going to have another, I think, another interesting show next week, but I don't know what it is yet, so tune in and watch. See you then. Bye.